The doctor saw the billionaire's black wife cancer stage and warned him to divorce, the husband's decision. 3 hours earlier, Alicia had been smiling, radiant, perfect. She'd stood beside him at the grand opening of his newest hotel, the crown jewel of his empire. 500 guests, champagne flowing, cameras flashing. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then she collapsed. Have you ever had to face the consequences of choosing money over loyalty? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the courtroom as Preston Hale sat frozen, watching his ex-wife hold the documents that could destroy everything he'd built. 20 months ago, she was dying in a hospital bed while he handed her divorce papers. Today, she held his empire's fate in her hands. Have you ever watched someone you once loved become your worst nightmare? Have you ever had to face the consequences of choosing money over loyalty? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to choose between your reputation and doing what's right. What you're about to hear is the story of a man who thought he could buy his way out of anything, until the woman he abandoned when she was dying came back with the power to end him. But here's the twist that'll leave you speechless. The empire he sacrificed her to save, she's the only one who can rescue it now. Picture this. Atlanta's most powerful billionaire, Preston Hale, built his hotel empire from nothing. Marble lobbies, crystal chandeliers, properties stretching from Georgia to New York. But when his wife Alicia got sick, something sinister happened behind closed doors. The people he trusted most whispered poison in his ears. Divorce her before the press finds out. Protect your assets. She's replaceable. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to protect their image, hit that like button and buckle up, because this story will shake you to your core. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling. Alicia sat across from him, no longer the broken woman he'd left behind. Her back was straight, her eyes clear, and in her briefcase lay the contracts that could either save his crumbling empire or bury it forever. But to understand how he got here, how a love story became a war zone, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to the day Preston Hale thought he was saving his empire by destroying the woman who loved him most. And then everything changed. The ambulance sirens cut through Atlanta's morning traffic like a knife. Inside Emory University Hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Preston Hale paced the waiting room, his $1,000 shoes clicking against polished floors that reflected his panic. 3 hours earlier, Alicia had been smiling, radiant, perfect. She'd stood beside him at the grand opening of his newest hotel, the crown jewel of his empire. 500 guests, champagne flowing, cameras flashing. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then she collapsed. The doctors moved fast, but Preston's mind moved faster. This wasn't just about his wife anymore. This was about the headlines that would follow. The whispers. The stock prices that could plummet if investors thought his personal life was falling apart. Dr. Martinez emerged from the examination room, his face grave. "Mr. Hale, we need to talk privately." They walked down a corridor lined with windows overlooking Atlanta's picturesque skyline. From here, you could see Preston's hotels dotting the landscape like monuments to his success. But something darker was lurking in the doctor's expression. "Your wife has aggressive pancreatic cancer," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "Stage 3, possibly 4. We caught it late." Preston's world tilted. "How long?" "With treatment, maybe 18 months. Without it," the doctor shrugged. 6 weeks, maybe less." But what came next would shake Preston to his core. Dr. Martinez glanced around, then leaned closer. "Mr. Hale, I have to ask, have you considered the practical implications?" "What do you mean?" "Cancer treatment is expensive, very expensive. And if this becomes public knowledge, especially with your wife being so young, so visible in your business." The doctor paused. "The media attention could be devastating for your company." Preston stared at him. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that sometimes when a spouse becomes a liability, there are ways to protect your assets. Legal ways. Clean ways." The words hit Preston like a physical blow. This man, This doctor who'd taken an oath to save lives was essentially telling him to abandon his wife to save his empire. Think about it, Dr. Martinez continued. Your shareholders, your board members, they're going to have questions. A sick wife, medical bills, distracted leadership. These things matter in business. Cancer doesn't care about stock prices, but the media will have a field day. Preston walked back to Alicia's room in a daze. She was awake now, sitting up in the hospital bed, looking small and vulnerable in her designer dress from a morning's event. When she saw him, she smiled that same smile that had made him fall in love with her 3 years ago. The doctor says I need some tests, she said softly. But I'm sure it's nothing serious. Probably just stress from all the hotel openings. Preston sat beside her bed and took her hand. Her wedding ring caught the light, the 3-carat diamond he'd chosen because it was big enough to make a statement. Now it felt heavy, like a weight dragging them both down. Alicia, he started then stopped. How do you tell the woman you love that she's dying? How do you tell her that everyone expects you to choose your empire over her life? His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Heard about the hospital visit. We should talk. There are precautions we can take. Another text, this one from his business partner. Press is asking questions about Alicia. Might want to get ahead of this. And another from his mother. Preston, dear, I hope you're being smart about this situation. The family name is at stake. Even before the diagnosis was public, the vultures were circling. Everyone had an opinion about what Preston should do. Everyone except the woman lying in the hospital bed, trusting him to stand by her side. Preston, Alicia's voice was soft. You look worried. What did the doctor say? He looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who'd worked double shifts as an ICU nurse to put herself through nursing school. The woman who'd grown up in Birmingham's toughest neighborhood but never let it break her spirit. The woman who'd married him not for his money, but despite it. She'd faced down gunshot victims and overdoses, held the hands of dying patients, worked Christmas mornings and New Year's Eves because someone needed to care. She was the strongest person he knew. But lying there in that hospital bed, she looked so fragile, so human. The test will tell us more, he said finally. It wasn't a lie exactly, just not the whole truth. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever had to choose between someone you love and everything you've worked for. Because what Preston was about to face would test every value he thought he had. That night, while Alicia slept fitfully beside him in their penthouse, Preston stared at the Atlanta skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Every light represented something he'd built, something he'd fought for, something he'd sacrificed to achieve. But in the darkness, one question haunted him. What's an empire worth if you lose your soul to keep it? The answer would come sooner than he thought, because by morning, there would be papers on his desk that would change everything. Divorce papers, prepared by his lawyer, just in case. But to understand how Preston became the kind of man who would even consider such papers, we need to go back 2.5 years. Back to Birmingham General Hospital, where love bloomed in the most unlikely place. Preston hadn't planned to fall in love that day. He'd driven to Birmingham on business, scouting locations for a new hotel chain targeting smaller southern cities. The plan was simple: buy cheap land, build luxury properties, capture the market before competitors arrived. He'd been driving past Birmingham General when the accident happened. A delivery truck ran a red light, slamming into a compact car right in front of him. Without thinking, Preston pulled over and ran toward the wreckage. The driver was unconscious, blood streaming down her face. Preston called 911, but traffic was backing up fast. The ambulance would take time to navigate through the mess. That's when she appeared. Alicia Davis, 28 years old, just getting off her night shift, still wearing scrubs with cartoon cats on them. She took one look at the accident and sprinted across 4 lanes of traffic like she'd done it 1,000 times. I'm a nurse, she said, dropping to her knees beside the injured driver. Her hands moved with surgical precision, checking pulse, assessing damage, applying pressure to stop bleeding. Sir, I need you to help me. Apply pressure here while I check for spinal injuries. Preston had negotiated million-dollar deals, commanded boardrooms full of hostile executives, stared down corporate raiders. But watching this woman work, completely focused on saving a stranger's life, left him speechless. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. The paramedics took over, but not before one of them nodded at Alicia with obvious respect. "Nice work, Davis. You probably saved his life." As the ambulance pulled away, Preston found himself standing on a Birmingham street corner with this woman who just performed a miracle in cartoon cat scrubs. "Thank you," he said. "That was incredible." She shrugged, suddenly looking tired. "Just doing my job." "Your job is running into traffic to save strangers. My job is taking care of people." She studied his face, taking in the expensive suit, the Italian shoes, the Rolex. "You're not from around here." "Atlanta. I'm Preston Hade." He extended his hand. "Alicia Davis." Her grip was firm, confident. "And you're bleeding." He looked down. In his rush to help, he'd cut his palm on broken glass. Blood was seeping through his fingers. "Come on," she said. "Emergency room's right there. Let's get you cleaned up." 20 minutes later, Preston sat on an examination table while Alicia stitched his palm with the same focused precision she'd shown at the accident scene. "So what brings Atlanta royalty to Birmingham?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "Royalty, Preston Hade. Hail hotels. I may work nights, but I read the business section." She glanced up, her eyes sharp with intelligence. "Your company's been buying up properties all over Alabama." He was surprised she knew who he was. Most people in Birmingham didn't follow Atlanta business news. "Market expansion. Gentrification, you mean?" Her voice was matter-of-fact, not accusing. "Luxury hotels pushing out local businesses." It's not personal," she said, finishing his stitches. "It's just business, right? But everything's personal to somebody." She was challenging him, but not with anger. With curiosity, like she genuinely wanted to understand his perspective. "You think I'm some kind of villain?" he asked. "I think you're a businessman who's probably never had to choose between paying rent or buying groceries." She cleaned up the medical supplies. "But you also just risked your life to help a stranger, so maybe you're more complicated than your reputation suggests." Something about her directness intrigued him. People usually told Preston what they thought he wanted to hear. Alicia told him what she actually thought. "Can I buy you breakfast?" he asked. "As a thank you. I don't date patients." "I'm not asking for a date. I'm asking if you'd let someone whose life you might have saved buy you pancakes." She studied him for a long moment. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here. Malin's. Best pancakes in Birmingham, but it doesn't look like much." "Sounds perfect." Malin's diner was everything she'd warned him about. Cracked vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, and a waitress who called everyone honey. But the pancakes were incredible, and the conversation was better. Alicia talked about growing up in Birmingham, about working her way through nursing school, about the satisfaction of helping people on their worst days. Preston found himself talking about things he'd never discussed with anyone. His fear of failure, his drive to prove himself, the loneliness that came with success. "You know what I think?" Alicia said, cutting into her second stack of pancakes. "I think you built an empire because you were afraid of being powerless. But real power isn't controlling everything. It's knowing when to let go." 3 hours later, when Preston finally left Birmingham, he couldn't stop thinking about the nurse with cartoon cat scrubs who'd seen right through him. He came back the next weekend, and the next. Within 6 months, he was driving to Birmingham every Friday after work, spending weekends at Malin's Diner, learning about a world he'd never known existed. But what happened next would change both their lives forever. The wedding made headlines in both Atlanta and Birmingham newspapers. Hotel mogul marries ICU nurse. Read like a modern fairy tale, but behind the scenes, something sinister was already brewing. Preston's mother had been the first to voice her concerns. "She's lovely, dear, but people will talk. A nurse from Birmingham? They'll say she's after your money." His business associates were less diplomatic. "Interesting choice, Preston. Very charitable of you." But Alicia faced the worst of it. The whispers followed her everywhere in Atlanta's social circles. At charity galas, women in $1,000 dresses would smile to her face and dissect her behind her back. "Did you see her shoes? Definitely not designer. I heard she still works at that hospital." "How quaint." "Well, At least Preston's doing his part for inner-city outreach. Alicia handled it all with grace that amazed Preston. She'd grown up fighting for everything she had: respect, education, opportunities. A few jealous socialites weren't going to break her. For 2 years, their marriage was solid. Alicia kept working at Birmingham General, driving the hour commute because she couldn't abandon her patients. Preston split his time between cities, building new properties while building a life with a woman who changed everything about how he saw the world. She made him better, more thoughtful, more aware of how his business decisions affected real people. When he wanted to build a luxury hotel in downtown Birmingham, Alicia suggested partnering with local businesses instead of pushing them out. The project became one of his most successful and most socially responsible. But success in marriage couldn't protect them from what was coming. The morning of the hotel opening, Alicia had been excited. She'd taken a day off from nursing to support Preston's latest venture. The Hale Birmingham Grand was their joint vision. Luxury accommodations that celebrated local culture instead of erasing it. "This feels different," she'd told him as they got ready. "Like we're building something that matters." Preston had watched her in the mirror as she applied lipstick, her nurse's hands steady and sure. Even getting dressed for a high society event, she moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years making life or death decisions. "You're incredible," he'd said, meaning it. She turned and kissed him, tasting like mint and possibility. "We're incredible. Together." 5 hours later, she was unconscious on a hospital gurney while doctors delivered the news that would test everything they'd built together. After Dr. Martinez dropped his bombshell about practical implications, Preston spent the night walking Atlanta's streets. The city looked different in the darkness, less like monuments to his success and more like a maze of choices he'd have to navigate. His phone buzzed constantly. Text messages, voicemails, emails, all from people who'd heard about Alicia's collapse and wanted to help him think through his options. His lawyer: "Preston, we need to discuss asset protection strategies. Call me." His business partner heard about Alicia. "This could complicate the IPO we discussed. Let's talk damage control." His publicist: "The press is already sniffing around. We need a unified message about Mrs. Hale's condition." Even his accountant weighed in. "Medical expenses for terminal cancer can reach 7 figures. We should review your insurance coverage and consider alternative arrangements." Alternative arrangements. Asset protection. Damage control. Everyone had a euphemism for the same suggestion. Cut Alicia loose before she became a liability. But one voice was noticeably absent from the chorus of advice: his own conscience. The next morning, Preston sat in his office high above Atlanta, staring at the stack of papers his lawyer had delivered. Divorce documents, pre-signed and ready to file. Just in case, the lawyer had said, "We can always destroy them if you change your mind." The papers felt heavy in his hands, heavier than they should have been. Legal language reduced 24 months of marriage to property divisions and asset allocations. There was no line item for love. No clause covering the way Alicia laughed at his terrible jokes or how she fell asleep reading medical journals. No provision for the way she changed him from a man who built walls into someone who could build bridges. But there were provisions for everything else. The penthouse would remain his. The vacation homes, the stock portfolios, the business interests. In the event of divorce, Alicia would receive a settlement, generous by most standards, but a tiny fraction of his worth. It's standard language, his lawyer had explained. "The prenup we drafted protects your interests while ensuring she's comfortable." Comfortable. As if comfort could replace the life they'd planned together. Preston's phone rang. The caller ID showed Birmingham General Hospital. "Mr. Hale? This is Dr. Williams, Alicia's oncologist. I wanted to discuss treatment options." "Treatment options? Your wife's cancer is aggressive, but not hopeless. There's an experimental therapy at MD Anderson in Houston. It's expensive, insurance won't cover it, but the preliminary results are promising. We're talking about potentially adding years to her life." Years. Not months, but years. How expensive? The full treatment protocol would run about $800,000. I know that's a substantial sum, but given your resources, $800,000. Preston had spent more than that on artwork for his hotel lobbies. He dropped $2 million on a racehorse last year because he liked its bloodline. But hearing the number attached to his wife's life made everything feel different. Have you ever been faced with a choice that revealed who you really are? When everything you thought you valued was tested by one impossible decision. Share in the comments below what matters most when everything's on the line. Because Preston was about to discover that some prices are too high to pay and others are too high not to pay. The divorce papers sat on his desk and signed but ready. The treatment information sat beside them, a different kind of contract. One path led to protecting his empire. The other led to fighting for his wife's life. In 12 hours, he would make a choice that would define the rest of both their lives. But first, he had to figure out which man he really was. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Preston bolted upright in the hospital chair where he'd fallen asleep beside Alicia's bed. The caller ID showed his business partner, Marcus Chun. "Preston, thank God you answered. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that makes or breaks companies. Hartwell Industries just launched a hostile takeover bid. They're offering 30% above market value for controlling interest." Preston's blood went cold. Hartwell Industries, his biggest competitor, led by Richard Hartwell, a man who'd been trying to destroy Preston's empire for 5 years. "How is that possible? Our stock isn't publicly traded enough for." "They've been quietly buying up shares for months. Small investors, pension funds, anyone willing to sell. They must have inside information about our quarterly projections." Preston looked at Alicia, sleeping peacefully despite the machines monitoring her vitals. Just 12 hours ago, his biggest worry was keeping his wife alive. Now his entire empire was under attack. "The board meeting is set for Friday," Marcus continued. "If we can't prove the company's stable financially and personally, some members might actually vote to accept the offer." There was the word that changed everything. "Personally." "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying Richard Hartwell is a smart man. He knows your wife is sick. He knows medical bills and emotional distraction could affect your leadership. He's counting on the board seeing you as compromised." Preston walked to the window overlooking Birmingham's dawn skyline. In the distance, he could see the hail Birmingham Grand, the hotel he and Alicia had dreamed up together. Now it might all belong to someone else. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. The Wall Street Journal got wind of Alicia's hospitalization. They're planning a piece about how personal crises affect CEO performance. The headline's already written, "When Love Becomes Liability." Preston closed his eyes. Everything was happening exactly as Dr. Martinez had predicted. Alicia's illness wasn't just threatening her life. It was threatening everything he'd built. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Contact MD Anderson in Houston. There's an experimental treatment." "Preston," Marcus's voice was sharp. "Think about what you're saying. $800,000 for experimental treatment that might not even work? The board will see it as emotional decision-making. They'll use it as proof that you're not thinking clearly. She's my wife, and Hale Industries is your life's work. The jobs of 3,000 employees, the investments of hundreds of shareholders. You can't save everyone, Preston. Sometimes you have to choose." After hanging up, Preston stood in that hospital corridor for an hour, watching the sun rise over Birmingham. Nurses walked past, beginning their shifts, carrying the same quiet determination he'd seen in Alicia the day they met. These people dedicated their lives to saving others, even when the odds were impossible. But Preston wasn't a nurse. He was a businessman. And business had rules that didn't care about love or loyalty or the way someone's laugh could light up a room. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "Divorce papers ready to file. Just say the word." Another text from his publicist. "Wall Street Journal wants comment on Alicia's condition. How should I respond?" And another from his mother. "Darling, I heard about the Hartwell situation. Perhaps it's time to make some difficult but necessary decisions." Everyone was pushing him toward the same conclusion. Cut losses, protect assets, save the empire. But when Preston walked back into Alicia's room, she was awake. "You look terrible," she said with a weak smile. When's the last time you slept in a real bed? I'm fine. Liar. She patted the bed beside her. Sit. Talk to me. He perched on the edge of the hospital bed, careful not to disturb the four lines. Up close, he could see how pale she'd become overnight, how the illness was already changing her. The doctor told me about the treatment in Houston, she said quietly. Preston's heart stopped. Alicia, it's expensive. Probably not covered by insurance. Experimental. She took his hand. Preston, I need you to promise me something. He waited. If this treatment doesn't work, if I don't make it through this, I need you to promise you won't let guilt destroy everything you've built. Your hotels, your employees, your dreams, they matter too. Don't talk like that. I'm a nurse, remember? I've seen this before. Good people bankrupting themselves, chasing miracle cures that don't exist. I won't let you do that. Preston stared at her. Even facing her own death, she was trying to protect him. What if I told you the treatment could work? What if I told you we could fight this? Then I'd ask you what it costs. When he hesitated, she squeezed his hand. What does it cost, Preston? $800,000. She was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot of money. I have a lot of money. You also have a company under attack, employees depending on you, and shareholders who trust you to make smart decisions. She touched his face. I fell in love with your strength, not your wealth. Don't lose the first, trying to protect the second. A tear ran down Preston's cheek. I can't lose you. You won't lose me. Even if my body gives up, you won't lose what we built together. The way you see people differently now, the way you care about more than just profit, that's still you. That's forever you. Preston's phone buzzed. Another text from his lawyer. Hartwell's people are asking questions about your wife's medical expenses. We need to file those papers today. But looking at Alicia, weak but still fighting, still thinking about everyone else before herself, Preston realized something that would change everything. He'd spent his whole life building walls to protect what mattered to him. But Alicia had taught him that some things, love, loyalty, doing what's right, couldn't be protected behind walls. Sometimes you had to step outside and fight in the open. The question was, did he have the courage to do it? Preston made his decision at 6:23 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, sitting in a diner called Malin's, the same place where he and Alicia had shared their first real conversation. The divorce papers lay on the table beside his untouched coffee, next to printouts of treatment protocols from MD Anderson. Two paths, two completely different futures. His phone had been ringing all morning. Marcus, the board members, his lawyer, even his mother. Everyone wanted to know his decision about Alicia, about the company, about which version of himself he was going to choose. But Preston wasn't ready to talk to any of them yet. He needed to think, and somehow, sitting in this Birmingham diner where everything started felt like the right place to do it. The waitress, the same woman who'd called him honey 3 years ago, refilled his coffee without asking. She remembered him, even though he looked nothing like the confident businessman who used to drive down from Atlanta every weekend. You look like you got the weight of the world on your shoulders, sugar, she said. Something like that. Well, whatever you're wrestling with, just remember, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. Sometimes the solution you think you can't afford is the only one that actually costs you nothing. After she walked away, Preston stared at those words written on a napkin. Sometimes the solution you think you can't afford is the only one that actually costs you nothing. What if everyone was wrong? What if saving Alicia and saving his company weren't opposing choices? What if there was a third option nobody had considered? Preston pulled out his laptop and started typing. Not divorce papers or resignation letters, but something else entirely. A business plan that would either save everything or destroy it all. 2 hours later, he walked into Birmingham General Hospital with a folder full of documents and a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew him. Alicia was sitting up in bed, reading medical journals despite everything the doctors had told her about rest. She looked up when he entered, and her face immediately showed concern. Preston, I look like a man who just figured out how to fight back. He sat beside her bed and opened the folder. I need to tell you something. About Hartwell Industries. About the takeover. About everything that's happening while you're lying here. He told her about the hostile takeover, about the board meeting, about the whispers that his personal crisis was making him unfit to lead. He told her about the advice everyone was giving him. Cut losses, protect assets, choose business over love. When he finished, Alicia was quiet for a long time. "So that's what this is really about," she said finally. "Not just my treatment. Your company. Both. Everything. They're using your illness as proof that I'm compromised, that I can't make rational decisions. And are they right?" Preston looked at her, really looked at her, pale but determined, sick but still sharp, facing death but still thinking clearly. "No," he said, "they're not right. Because a rational decision isn't always the same as a smart decision. And a smart decision isn't always the same as the right decision." He pulled out the documents he'd been working on. "What if I told you there's a way to pay for your treatment, fight off Hartwell, and prove to the board that my personal life makes me stronger, not weaker? I'd say you've been reading too many business magazines." Preston laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in days. "Maybe, but hear me out." He spread the papers across her hospital bed. Financial projections, marketing plans, partnership agreements. "The Alicia Davis Foundation for Medical Access," he said, "a nonprofit organization focused on making experimental cancer treatments available to people who can't afford them. Funded initially by Hale Industries as part of our corporate social responsibility initiative." Alicia stared at the documents. "Preston, your treatment becomes the foundation's first case. We pay for it, document everything, and if it works, we use your story to help other people get the same chance. If it doesn't," he swallowed hard, "if it doesn't work, we honor your memory by making sure other families don't have to choose between bankruptcy and hope. You want to turn my cancer into a business opportunity? I want to turn your cancer into a weapon against everything that's wrong with healthcare in this country. I want to prove that profit and compassion aren't opposites. And I want to show Richard Hartwell and every other corporate vulture that the strongest companies are the ones that stand by their values, even when it's expensive." Alicia was quiet, studying the numbers. Her nursing background had given her a solid understanding of healthcare economics, and Preston could see her mind working through the implications. "The board will think you're crazy," she said finally. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize that a CEO who's willing to risk everything for what's right is exactly the kind of leader they want in a crisis. And if Hartwell uses this against you, if he spins it as evidence that you're making emotional decisions." Preston took her hands. "Then we prove him wrong. We show the world that the most successful businesses are the ones that remember they're run by human beings, not machines." Alicia looked at him for a long time. "You know this could backfire. You could lose everything. I've already lost everything that matters if I lose you. Everything else is just stuff." For the first time since the diagnosis, Alicia smiled, really smiled. "Okay," she said, "let's fight." But neither of them knew that Richard Hartwell was already 3 moves ahead, with a strategy that would test everything they thought they understood about loyalty, power, and the price of doing what's right. The real war was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Preston stood in the boardroom of Hale Industries, facing 12 of the most powerful business leaders in Atlanta. The mahogany table reflected the city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the atmosphere was anything but bright. Richard Hartwell sat at the far end like a king holding court, silver-haired, sharp-suited, and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who thought he'd already won. "Gentlemen, ladies," Preston began, his voice steady despite everything riding on the next hour. "I know why we're here. Hartwell Industries has made an offer for our company, an offer some of you think we should accept." Board member Janet Mills shifted uncomfortably. "Preston, we're concerned about your judgment lately. The medical expenses, the foundation announcement, the media attention. It's affecting our stock price. Our stock price has dropped 8% since news of your wife's illness became public," added board member David Chun, Marcus's father and one of Preston's oldest advisors. "Investors are nervous about leadership stability." Hartwell leaned back in his chair, saying nothing. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was making Preston's own board members doubt their loyalty. "I understand your concerns," Preston said, "which is why I've prepared something that addresses every single one of them." He activated the wall screen and displayed the first slide of his presentation. The title read, "The Alicia Davis Foundation, Turning Crisis into Competitive Advantage." 3 weeks ago, you thought my wife's illness was a liability. Tonight, I'm going to show you how it became our greatest asset. The room was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning. The Alicia Davis Foundation launched 16 days ago with a single patient, my wife. The experimental treatment at MD Anderson costs $800,000. But here's what you don't know yet. Preston clicked to the next slide, showing media coverage from the past 2 weeks. Headlines from CNN, Forbes, the New York Times, all covering the story of the billionaire who created a foundation to save his wife and help others facing the same impossible choice. We've received over 400 applications from families seeking treatment funding. The average media value of our coverage has been $12 million, positive coverage that will have cost us 3 times that in traditional advertising. Janet Mills looked up from her tablet. Media coverage doesn't translate to revenue, Preston. You're right, but partnerships do. Preston clicked again. 17 pharmaceutical companies have reached out about partnering with our foundation for drug trials. MD Anderson wants to establish a joint research facility. 3 major insurance companies are exploring coverage expansion based on our treatment outcomes. David Chun frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying that what looked like a personal crisis has positioned Hale Industries at the forefront of healthcare innovation. We're not just building hotels anymore. We're building hope. Hartwell finally spoke, his voice smooth as silk. Very touching, Preston. But hope doesn't pay dividends. Your wife's treatment is expensive. Your emotional state is compromised, and your focus is divided. Is it? Preston walked to the window overlooking Atlanta's skyline. Let me tell you what happened yesterday at MD Anderson. He paused, letting the tension build. Alicia responded to the first round of treatment better than anyone expected. Her tumor markers dropped 30% in 2 weeks. The doctors are calling it remarkable. Several board members looked genuinely pleased. These weren't just business associates. Many had known Alicia personally. But here's the real breakthrough, Preston continued. The drug combination that's working for Alicia? It's never been tested in this specific sequence before. MD Anderson wants to patent the protocol jointly with our foundation. If it proves successful in trials, we're looking at licensing revenue that could exceed our hotel profits within 5 years. The room buzzed with whispers. Richard Hartwell's confident expression flickered for the first time. Furthermore, Preston said, clicking to financial projections, the foundation has already secured major donations from other business leaders who see the value in this cause. $23 million committed in the first month. From whom? Hartwell demanded. Preston smiled. From your own investors, Richard. Turns out, when you spend years trying to destroy a competitor, people notice. When that competitor chooses love over profit, people remember. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Several of Hartwell's key financial backers had not only refused to support the hostile takeover, they'd actively funded Preston's foundation instead. This is ridiculous. Hartwell stood up, his composure finally cracking. You're asking this board to believe that your wife's cancer is somehow good for business? No, Preston said quietly. I'm asking them to believe that a leader who fights for what's right, even when it's expensive, is the kind of leader they want running their investments. He clicked to the final slide, a photo of Alicia from that morning, weak but smiling, surrounded by flowers and cards from strangers around the country who'd heard their story. Richard, you built your career by being ruthless, by cutting costs and eliminating what you saw as weakness. But you missed something crucial about human nature. Preston walked closer to Hartwell, his voice carrying across the silent room. People don't just invest in companies. They invest in stories. And stories about love beating greed. Stories about standing by your values, even when the world tells you to compromise. Those stories don't just make money. They make legacies. Janet Mills was the first to speak. The foundation's revenue projections look solid, and the media coverage has been overwhelmingly positive. David Chin nodded slowly. If the treatment protocol proves successful, The patent licensing alone could be worth hundreds of millions. One by one, the board members began asking detailed questions about partnerships, projections, and strategic implementation. The conversation had shifted from whether to sell the company to how to maximize the foundation's potential. Richard Hartwell watched his carefully orchestrated takeover crumble in real time. "This isn't over," he said, gathering his papers. "You're right," Preston replied. "It's just beginning. Because tomorrow, every business leader in America will see what happens when you bet against love. And they'll remember which side won." But as Hartwell left the boardroom, Preston noticed something that made his blood run cold. The older man was smiling, like he knew something Preston didn't, something that would change everything once again. The victory celebration lasted exactly 18 hours. Preston was at MD Anderson with Alicia, watching her receive her third round of treatment, when Marcus burst into the hospital room with news that shattered everything. "Preston, we have a problem. A big one." Alicia looked up from her treatment chair, feline running into her arm, pumping experimental drugs that were slowly saving her life. "Marcus, whatever it is can wait." "No, it can't." Marcus's face was pale. "Richard Hartwell just filed a lawsuit against the foundation. He's claiming fraud, misrepresentation, and illegal use of corporate funds for personal benefit." Preston felt the world tilt. That's impossible. Every dollar was accounted for. Every transaction was legitimate. "He's not questioning the money trail," Marcus said, pulling out his tablet. "He's questioning Alicia's diagnosis." The words hit like a physical blow. Alicia's hand tightened around the chair's armrest. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Marcus showed them the lawsuit paperwork. Hartwell hired private investigators. They've been digging into medical records, talking to former colleagues, building a case that your cancer diagnosis was exaggerated to manipulate the board and generate sympathy donations. Preston stood up so fast his chair fell over. "That's insane. She's literally getting chemotherapy right now." "I know that. You know that." But Hartwell's lawyers are arguing that the timing was suspicious. Wife gets sick right when the company faces a takeover. Mysterious experimental treatment that just happens to create positive media coverage. They're saying it looks orchestrated. Alicia disconnected her with the practiced efficiency of a nurse who'd done it 1,000 times. "I need to see this." She read through the legal documents with growing horror. The investigators had interviewed people from Birmingham General, colleagues who remembered her as healthy and energetic. They'd analyzed the timeline of her diagnosis against Preston's business challenges. They'd even questioned whether her collapse at the hotel opening was genuine or performed. "They're calling me a liar," she said quietly. "They're saying I faked cancer to help Preston's business." "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "The story hits the Wall Street Journal tomorrow morning. The fake cancer scandal. How far will a CEO go? By evening, it'll be on every news channel in the country." Preston paced the small hospital room like a caged animal. "We'll fight it. Medical records, doctor testimony, treatment documentation. We have proof." Hartwell's lawyers anticipated that. They're claiming the medical records could have been altered after the fact, that friendly doctors might lie for wealthy patients. They're demanding independent medical examinations by court-appointed physicians. Alicia looked down at the needle marks on her arm, at the 4 bruises that had become her constant companion. "So let them examine me. Let them run their tests. The truth will speak for itself." "Alicia," Marcus said gently, "that's not how public opinion works. By the time the medical examination proves you're really sick, the damage will be done. The foundation will lose its donors. The board will lose confidence. The business partnerships will disappear. And Hartwell gets exactly what he wanted." Preston finished. "Our company, destroyed by scandal instead of bought through negotiation." The 3 of them sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the hospital around them. Other patients fighting their own battles, families holding on to hope, medical staff working miracles one case at a time. Finally, Alicia spoke. "There's something you need to know, something I haven't told anyone." Preston and Marcus looked at her. "The night before the hotel opening, I knew something was wrong. I've been having symptoms for weeks: fatigue, pain, nausea. I've been putting off seeing a doctor because I didn't want to worry Preston during such an important time. She took a shaky breath. I almost didn't go to the opening. I felt terrible, but I knew how much it meant to Preston, so I took pain medication and pushed through it. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was my body finally giving up after weeks of fighting. Preston knelt beside her chair. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared, and because I knew you'd blame yourself for not noticing sooner." Tears ran down her cheeks. Now Hartwell's going to use my silence against us. He's going to say I was planning this deception for weeks. Marcus looked up from his tablet. "Actually, that might work in our favor." "Ow! If you were planning to fake a collapse, you wouldn't have pushed through symptoms for weeks first. A fake collapse would have been dramatic, perfectly timed for maximum impact. Your symptoms, your attempts to hide them, your dedication to supporting Preston despite feeling terrible. That's not the behavior of someone orchestrating a scam. But will anyone believe that?" Before Marcus could answer, Preston's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hale? This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the FDA's Drug Trial Division. I understand your foundation is working with MD Anderson on an experimental cancer protocol." Preston put the call on speaker. "Yes, that's correct. Sir, we've been following your wife's case with great interest. The treatment response has been remarkable. We'd like to fast-track approval for expanded trials based on her results." Preston, Alicia, and Marcus exchanged glances. "However," Dr. Walsh continued, "we've become aware of some legal challenges questioning the legitimacy of the case. I need to ask directly, is there any truth to allegations that Mrs. Hale's condition was misrepresented?" "Absolutely not," Preston said firmly. "Then you won't mind if we conduct our own independent medical review? We need to ensure the integrity of any treatment protocol we approve." After hanging up, the three of them sat in stunned silence. "Well," Alicia said finally, "looks like we're about to find out if the truth is strong enough to survive a war." But none of them realized that the real battle was just beginning. The FDA medical review took place on a Thursday morning in a sterile examination room that felt more like a courtroom. 3 independent doctors, 2 FDA officials, and a court stenographer surrounded Alicia as she underwent the most thorough medical examination of her life. Preston sat in the waiting area, watching reporters gather outside the hospital through bulletproof glass windows. The Wall Street Journal article had exploded into a national scandal overnight. Cable news shows debated whether fake Cancergate represented a new low in corporate manipulation. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from board members, investors, and journalists. He ignored them all except one. Preston. It was his mother, her voice tight with controlled panic. "I just saw the news. Please tell me this isn't as bad as it looks." "It's worse," he said honestly, "but we're going to fight it. Darling, perhaps it's time to consider strategic options. Distance yourself from the foundation. Issue a statement expressing shock at the allegations. You want me to abandon Alicia? I want you to save what can be saved. Your reputation, the company, the family name. Sometimes sacrificing one battle is necessary to win the war." Preston hung up on his own mother. 2 hours later, Dr. Elizabeth Manning, the lead FDA reviewer, emerged from the examination room. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Hale, could we speak privately?" They walked to a small conference room where Marcus was waiting with legal documents spread across the table. "I've completed my examination of your wife," Dr. Manning began. "I've reviewed her medical history, analyzed her current condition, and consulted with her treating physicians." Preston held his breath. "Mrs. Hale has stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis is legitimate. The symptoms are consistent with the timeline she provided, and her response to treatment is genuinely remarkable." Relief flooded through Preston like a physical wave. "However, Dr. Manning continued, I need to address some concerning elements of this case." Preston's heart stopped. "The treatment protocol your wife is receiving wasn't approved through standard channels. Dr. Martinez, who first suggested the practical implications of your wife's diagnosis, have a history of providing creative financial advice to wealthy patients. And the timing of your foundation's launch does align suspiciously with your company's hostile takeover situation. Marcus leaned forward. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I am stating facts. But here's what bothers me most. Dr. Manning pulled out a thick folder. I've seen medical fraud before. Patients who exaggerate symptoms for attention. Families who exploit illness for financial gain. Doctors who participate in insurance scams. She opened the folder, revealing dozens of photos. Alicia during treatment, Preston reading to her during chemo sessions, nurses who become surrogate family. This isn't fraud. This is love. Complicated, messy, expensive love that happened to intersect with business circumstances. But love nonetheless. Preston felt tears he'd been holding back for weeks finally escape. Mrs. Hale's cancer is real. Her treatment is legitimate. And her response is giving us data that could help thousands of other patients. Anyone who suggests this family is exploiting illness for gain doesn't understand what they're looking at. Dr. Manning stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Hale, you should know, I've seen Richard Hartwell's operation before. This isn't his first attempt to destroy a competitor using personal tragedy. 5 years ago, he tried something similar with a tech company CEO whose child had leukemia. What happened? The CEO was so busy defending himself against fraud allegations that he missed Hartwell's real strategy. By the time the medical truth came out, Hartwell had already acquired enough company stock to force a sale. After she left, Preston and Marcus sat in stunned silence. He's not trying to prove Alicia's lying, Marcus realized. He's trying to distract us while he completes his takeover. Preston's phone rang. Janet Mills from aboard. Preston, we've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Several major shareholders are threatening to sell their positions because of this scandal. We need to address their concerns immediately. Janet, the FDA just confirmed. I know what the FDA confirmed, but the stock market doesn't care about medical truth. It cares about perception. And right now, the perception is that our CEO is either a liar or dangerously distracted by personal problems. That evening, Preston sat beside Alicia's hospital bed as she recovered from the day's examinations. She looked exhausted but determined. The doctors hurt you today, he said, noticing the new bruises from blood draws and biopsies. They were doing their job. Same thing I'd do if I were in their position. She took his hand. Preston, I need to tell you something. What? Even if we win this fight, even if we prove I'm really sick and the foundation is legitimate, there's going to be another attack. And another one after that. Hartwell won't stop until he destroys everything we've built. So what are you suggesting? Alicia was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at Houston's skyline. I'm suggesting we stop playing defense and start playing offense. Stop trying to prove we're not what he says we are, and start showing people what we actually are, which is a family that refuses to give up, a company that puts people before profit, a foundation that turns personal tragedy into hope for others. She squeezed his hand. Tomorrow, when you go to that board meeting, don't defend our choices. Celebrate them. Preston looked at his wife. Pale, exhausted, fighting for her life while somehow still fighting for their future. What if they vote to sell? Then we'll build something better from scratch. Together. But as Preston kissed her goodnight, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the parking garage across the street. Someone who'd been documenting their every move, building a case that would either destroy them completely or give them the ammunition they needed to fight back. The war wasn't over. It was about to get personal. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. At 8:47 a.m., Preston walked into the Hale Industries boardroom, carrying a single folder and a decision that would either save his company or end his career. The room was packed. All 12 board members, plus representatives from major shareholders, legal counsel, and Richard Hartwell himself, sitting at the table like he already owned the place. Gentlemen, ladies, Preston began, not bothering to sit down. I know why we're here. You want to discuss whether I'm fit to lead this company. Janet Mills cleared her throat. Preston, recent events have raised serious questions about my judgment, about my priorities, about whether a man who spends $800,000 on his wife's cancer treatment can be trusted with shareholders' money. Preston opened his folder. You want answers? Here they are. He pulled out the first document, The FDA's medical review. Alicia's cancer is real. Her treatment is legitimate. Her response is remarkable. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either ignorant or lying. Richard Hartwell leaned back in his chair. No one's questioning your wife's illness anymore, Preston. We're questioning your decision-making process. The foundation, the media circus, the way you've turned your personal life into a public spectacle. You're right, Preston said, surprising everyone in the room. I did turn our personal life into a public spectacle. Want to know why? He pulled out the next document, financial projections for the Alicia Davis Foundation. Because that spectacle has generated $47 million in donations. Because it's created partnerships worth $200 million in future revenue. Because it's positioned Hale Industries as a leader in healthcare innovation. David Chun frowned. Those numbers seem optimistic. Do they? Preston clicked on the wall screen, displaying a live feed from the Foundation's website. We're getting 300 new donation pledges per hour. Pharmaceutical companies are bidding against each other for partnership rights. MD Anderson wants to name their new research wing after Alicia. The room buzzed with whispers. But here's the number that matters most, Preston continued, pulling out the final document. Our stock price is up 12% since the FDA confirmed Alicia's diagnosis. Investors aren't running away from a CEO who fights for his values. They're investing more. Richard Hartwell's confident expression flickered. Stock prices fluctuate. What matters is long-term stability. You're absolutely right, Preston agreed. Which brings me to my main point. He walked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. Richard, you spent 18 months trying to buy this company. You've manipulated stock prices, spread rumors about my leadership, and even hired investigators to attack my dying wife. Want to know why? Hartwell said nothing. Because you know something the rest of the business world is just figuring out. Companies led by people with actual values don't just survive economic downturns. They thrive during them. When markets crash and investors panic, people flock to businesses they trust. Preston stopped directly in front of Hartwell. You weren't trying to buy Hale Industries because we were weak. You were trying to buy us because we were becoming too strong to compete against. He returned to his position at the head of the table. So here's my proposal for this board. We don't just reject Hartwell's takeover offer. We go on the offensive. We use the Foundation's success and media attention to launch the largest expansion in company history. Janet Mills looked skeptical. That seems incredibly risky given current circumstances. Janet, what's risky is sitting still while our competitors copy our innovations. What's risky is letting other companies capitalize on the healthcare partnerships we created. What's risky is playing it safe when we have momentum. Preston clicked to the next slide. A map showing proposed hotel locations across 15 new cities. The Alicia Davis Foundation isn't separate from Hale Industries. It's our competitive advantage. Every hotel we build will include on-site medical facilities staffed by Foundation partners. Every property will donate a percentage of profits to treatment research. Every guest will know they're staying at a company that puts human dignity before profit margins. Board member after board member began asking detailed questions about implementation, financing, and strategic partnerships. The conversation had shifted from whether Preston should lead to how quickly they could execute his vision. Richard Hartwell watched his hostile takeover dissolve in real time. This is a mistake, he said, standing up. You're betting everything on emotion instead of logic. When this healthcare bubble bursts, when the media moves on to the next story, you'll be left with expensive promises you can't keep. Maybe, Preston acknowledged, but I'd rather fail trying to build something meaningful than succeed by tearing down what others have built. Hartwell gathered his papers. We'll see how meaningful it feels when your stock price crashes. Richard, Preston called as the older man reached the door. My stock price isn't what keeps me awake at night anymore. My conscience is. After Hartwell left, the board voted unanimously to reject the takeover offer and approve Preston's expansion plan. But as the meeting ended, Preston received a text message that made his blood run cold. Congratulations on your victory. Now let's see how you handle what comes next. A friend. Attached was a photo of Alicia in her hospital room, taken from outside her window. Someone was watching them. Someone who knew their every move. And whoever had just declared war. The photo had been taken at 3:17 a.m. from the parking garage across from MD Anderson. Alicia was asleep in her hospital bed, Preston dozing in the chair beside her, both unaware they were being watched. Marcus arrived at the hospital within an hour, bringing a security team and a folder full of disturbing news. "We traced a phone number," he told Preston in the hospital hallway. "It's a burner phone registered to a private investigation firm in Dallas. The same firm Richard Hartwell hired to dig into Alicia's medical records. So Hartwell's behind the surveillance? That's where it gets complicated." Marcus opened the folder. The PI firm was hired by Hartwell, but they were also hired by someone else. Someone who's been paying them to watch Hartwell watch you. Preston stared at the documents. Someone's been investigating the investigator? For the past 6 months, whoever it is has been tracking Hartwell's every move, documenting his attempts to manipulate your stock price, recording his conversations with board members. Who would do that? Before Marcus could answer, Alicia's nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Hale, your wife is asking for you, and there's someone here to see you both." In Alicia's room, a woman Preston didn't recognize sat in the visitor's chair. She was in her 50s, well-dressed, with the sharp eyes of someone accustomed to getting answers. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, my name is Victoria Chun. I'm David Chin's sister, and I have a story to tell you that explains everything that's been happening." Preston recognized the name. David Chun was on his board, but Victoria Chun was a legend in corporate law, the attorney who'd taken down 3 Fortune 500 companies for securities fraud. 5 years ago, Victoria began, "Richard Hartwell destroyed my client's company using the exact same playbook he's using against you. Personal tragedy, manufactured scandal, hostile takeover while the CEO was distracted by family crisis." She pulled out a tablet showing newspaper headlines from 2018. TechFlow Industries. The CEO's 8-year-old daughter had leukemia. Hartwell's people spread rumors that the family was exaggerating her condition to generate sympathy and manipulate stock prices. Alicia sat up straighter in her hospital bed. What happened? The CEO spent so much time and energy defending his daughter's diagnosis that he missed Hartwell's real strategy. By the time the truth came out, Hartwell had acquired enough shares to force a sale. TechFlow's breakthrough technology became Hartwell's property, and 1,500 people lost their jobs. Preston felt sick. The same pattern. Exactly the same. But this time I was watching. Victoria's maidgrimli. When my brother told me about Hartwell's interest in Hale Industries, I started documenting everything. The stock manipulation, the planted news stories, the private investigators, all of it. She handed Preston a thick folder. Everything you need to destroy Richard Hartwell's reputation and business empire. Securities fraud, market manipulation, witness intimidation, corporate espionage. The man's been breaking federal laws for years. Marcus flipped through the documents, his eyes widening. This is comprehensive. I've been building this case for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to act. When Hartwell attacked your wife's cancer diagnosis, he crossed a line that made it personal. Alicia looked confused. But why? You don't even know us. Victoria's expression softened. "Mrs. Hale, my daughter died of pancreatic cancer 12 years ago. She was 26 years old, a brilliant engineer with everything to live for. If there had been a foundation like yours back then, if there had been experimental treatments available, if someone with resources had been willing to fight the system." She stopped, collecting herself. Richard Hartwell profits from human suffering. He destroys companies when they're vulnerable, eliminates competition when people are fighting for their lives. It's time someone fought back. Preston studied the documents. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we turn the tables completely. Instead of defending against Hartwell's attacks, we go on the offensive. We expose him for what he really is, a corporate predator who targets families in crisis." That sounds like revenge, not justice. Sometimes they're the same thing. Victoria stood up. "Mr. Hale, you built your reputation on being ethical, on putting values before profit. But ethics without power is just philosophy. This is your chance to use power in service of ethics." Alicia had been quiet throughout the conversation, but now she spoke up. What would happen to Hartwell's employees if his company collapsed? Victoria looked surprised by the question. I hadn't considered that. I have, Alicia said. The people who work for him aren't responsible for his choices. If we destroy his company, we're hurting innocent families to get revenge on one guilty man. Preston looked at his wife with renewed admiration. Even while fighting for her own life, she was thinking about protecting others. What are you suggesting? Victoria asked. I'm suggesting we give Richard Hartwell a choice, Alicia said. He can quietly withdraw his takeover bid and face whatever legal consequences his actions deserve, or we can expose everything and let the courts decide his fate. But either way, we protect his employees. Preston took Alicia's hand. A controlled demolition instead of an explosion. Exactly. Victoria considered this. That's more complicated, but probably more effective in the long run. Hartwell's people would be grateful instead of resentful. Some might even want to work for more ethical companies. Companies like ours, Marcus added, seeing the bigger picture. As the three of them discussed strategy, Preston realized something profound had happened. The crisis that was supposed to destroy him had instead revealed allies he never knew he had, strengths he never knew he possessed, and a wife whose wisdom ran deeper than he'd ever imagined. But Richard Hartwell wasn't going to surrender quietly, and the final battle would test everything they'd learned about power, loyalty, and the price of doing what's right. The war was entering its final phase. 6 months later, Preston stood in the gleaming lobby of the First Hale Medical Hotel in downtown Birmingham, watching construction workers put the finishing touches on what would become the most revolutionary healthcare facility in the South. The building rose 12 stories above the neighborhood where Alicia had grown up, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of hope. Inside, luxury hotel amenities merged seamlessly with cutting-edge medical facilities. Patients could receive world-class treatment while their families stayed in comfort, all funded through the Alicia Davis Foundation's partnership network. It's beautiful, Alicia said, walking up beside him. Her hair had grown back curly after chemotherapy, and though she was thinner than before, the light in her eyes burned brighter than ever. The experimental treatment had worked. Not perfectly. She would need ongoing monitoring for years, but well enough that doctors were calling her a miracle case. The treatment protocol developed for Alicia was now being tested in trials across 15 major medical centers. You sure you're ready for this? Preston asked, straightening his tie. In 30 minutes, they would hold the ribbon-cutting ceremony, officially opening the facility and announcing the foundation's expansion to 25 cities nationwide. Are you kidding? I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. Alicia adjusted the lapel of her navy blue suit, the same color she'd worn the day they met. A place where families don't have to choose between bankruptcy and hope. Where being poor doesn't mean you deserve to die. This is everything I dreamed of as a nurse. Victoria Chun approached, carrying a folder that had become all too familiar over the past months. Preston, Alicia, we have news about Hartwell. The legal case against Richard Hartwell had moved slowly but decisively. Victoria's evidence was overwhelming. 5 years of documented securities fraud, market manipulation, and corporate espionage. Federal prosecutors had finally moved to indict him on 17 felony charges. He's agreed to a plea deal, Victoria announced. Full restitution to his victims, including TechFlow Industries. His company will be dissolved and its assets distributed to employees as severance packages. He'll serve 3 years minimum security and be banned from corporate leadership permanently. Preston felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice, but at what cost to everyone involved? What about his employees? Alicia asked, always thinking about the human impact. Most are being hired by competitors at higher salaries. Turns out people who worked for Hartwell were actually skilled professionals trapped in a corrupt system. When given better options, they jumped at the chance. Marcus joined them, grinning widely. Preston, you need to see this. He handed over his tablet, showing the morning's financial news. Hale Industries stock hit an all-time high. The foundation partnership model is being copied by 6 major corporations. Harvard Business School wants to write a case study about our values-driven expansion strategy. Preston shook his head in amazement. 2 years ago, he'd been advised to divorce his dying wife to protect his business reputation. Now that same business was thriving because he'd chosen love over profit. Speaking of Harvard, Alicia said with a mischievous smile, "I got a call yesterday. They want me to lecture on healthcare innovation to MBA students. You gonna do it? Only if you come with me. This was never just my fight or just your company. Everything we built together." The ceremony began with a speech from Birmingham's mayor, praising the facility as a model for public-private partnerships. Medical professionals from across the country had come to see the integration of luxury hospitality with cutting-edge healthcare. But the moment that would be remembered came when Alicia took the microphone. 2 years ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, dying of cancer, watching my husband agonize over an impossible choice: save his company or save his wife. The people around us said he couldn't do both. Her voice carried across the crowd of dignitaries, medical professionals, and community members. They were wrong. Not because the choice was easy, but because the choice was false. Love doesn't weaken you. Values don't make you vulnerable. Compassion doesn't hurt your bottom line. They make you stronger, smarter, and more successful than you ever thought possible. She paused, looking directly at Preston. This building exists because one man refused to believe that profit and principle were enemies. Because he bet everything on the idea that doing right by people would ultimately do right by business. Because he chose love when the world told him to choose fear. The applause was thunderous, but Preston only heard Alicia's voice. The Alicia Davis Foundation has now funded treatment for over 800 families. We've created partnerships with 42 medical institutions. We've helped develop 3 new treatment protocols that are saving lives around the world. She smiled, and Preston saw the same woman who'd run into traffic to save a stranger, who'd stitched his cut palm while challenging his assumptions about power and responsibility. But the most important thing we've proven is this: when you build your life on loving what's right instead of fearing what's wrong, miracles stop being rare and start being inevitable. As Alicia cut the ribbon and cameras flashed, Preston realized they'd done something unprecedented. They turned a personal crisis into a public good, a business challenge into a social revolution, a love story into a legacy. But as the crowd cheered and reporters shouted questions, Preston noticed someone watching from the back of the crowd. Someone whose presence would soon test everything they built in ways they never expected. The foundation's success had made them powerful, but it had also made them targets for those who saw compassion as weakness and generosity as opportunity. The next chapter of their story was about to begin. The attack came from an unexpected direction. 3 weeks after the Birmingham facility opening, Preston was in his Atlanta office reviewing foundation applications when Marcus burst in with news that stopped his heart. "Preston, we have a problem. Channel 7 is running an expose tonight about the foundation's spending practices." Preston looked up from the stack of treatment requests he'd been reviewing, families from across the country begging for help their insurance wouldn't cover. "What kind of expose?" Marcus activated the wall screen, showing a preview of the evening news segment. The headline read, "Foundation or Fortune? How Billionaire'S Charity Became Personal Piggy Bank." Preston's stomach dropped as he watched the preview. The reporter, Janet Walsh, stood outside the Birmingham facility with a microphone and a hostile expression. "Tonight at 11, we'll show you how Preston Hale used his wife's cancer diagnosis to create a tax shelter that funnels money back to his business empire. From luxury hotel suites disguised as patient rooms to medical equipment purchases that benefit Hale industry suppliers, the Alicia Davis Foundation may be the most sophisticated charity scam in American history." "This is insane," Preston muttered. "Every transaction is transparent. Every dollar is accounted for. We publish quarterly reports." It gets worse. Marcus clicked to social media feeds showing the story gaining traction. Someone's been feeding Walsh information for weeks. Internal documents, financial records, even recorded phone conversations between you and Alicia discussing foundation strategy. Preston felt the familiar weight of betrayal settling over him. Who? We don't know yet. But whoever it is has access to everything: board meetings, hospital visits, private conversations. This isn't random journalism. This is coordinated warfare. That evening, Preston and Alicia sat in their Atlanta penthouse watching their life's work get dissected on television. The reporter had assembled a compelling case using selective editing and emotional manipulation. Notice how the Foundation's Birmingham facility is located directly across from a Hale Industries property. Walsh narrated over aerial footage. Patients and families staying at Foundation-funded accommodations are required to book rooms at Hale hotels, generating millions in revenue. That's not how it works, Alicia said quietly. Families can stay wherever they want. We just offer discounted rates at our hotels as a convenience. But the TV report made it sound sinister. Every partnership looked like corruption. Every efficiency looked like embezzlement. Every success looked like a scam. The most damaging segment came near the end. Hidden camera footage of Preston and Alicia discussing Foundation expansion plans, recorded in what appeared to be a restaurant. We need to be strategic about which cities we enter, Preston's voice said on the recording. The Foundation gives us cover to explore markets we couldn't otherwise justify. And the medical partnerships create relationships that benefit our hotel development long-term, Alicia's voice added. Out of context, it sounded like they were using charity as a business development tool. That conversation was about making sure we could sustain the Foundation's mission, Alicia protested. We were talking about building genuine partnerships that would last. But Preston knew the damage was done. By morning, the story would be national news. Federal investigators would launch inquiries. Donors would withdraw support. Everything they'd built would be questioned. His phone started ringing before the segment ended. Board members, investors, journalists, all wanting answers to questions that seemed designed to have no good responses. Janet Mills called first. Preston, the board needs an emergency meeting. Shareholders are panicking, and the IRS is already asking questions about the Foundation's tax-exempt status. David Chun called next. The medical partnerships are reviewing their contracts. If this charity fraud allegation sticks, they can't risk being associated with us. Even Victoria Chun, their ally in the Hartwell fight, called with concern. Preston, I've seen this playbook before. Someone's trying to destroy your reputation using the exact same methods Hartwell used, just more sophisticated. Who would do this? Someone who learned from Hartwell's mistakes. Someone who knows that direct attacks failed. So now they're using your own success against you. As the calls continued, Preston realized the trap they'd walked into. By building something genuinely good, they'd made themselves vulnerable to anyone who could twist that goodness into something that looked corrupt. The cruelest part was that the Foundation's success made the allegations seem more believable. Of course, a Billionaire'S charity was secretly profitable. Why else would rich people get involved in helping others? Preston, Alicia said after he'd finished the last call, I need to tell you something. She pulled out her laptop and showed him financial projections she'd been working on privately. I've been tracking every dollar the Foundation has spent and every dollar it's generated for our businesses. You want to know the truth? The Foundation has cost us money. Lots of money. Preston looked at the spreadsheet. Hotel discounts for patient families, medical equipment purchases at above-market rates, staffing costs for specialized facilities. When everything was properly accounted for, the Foundation was a net loss for Hale Industries. We're not making money off charity, Alicia continued. We're losing money to do charity right, which means whoever's behind this attack knows they're lying. Then why dash? Because truth doesn't matter if people don't believe it. Because complex financial records are boring, but scandal stories are entertaining. Because destroying something good is easier than building something better. Preston stared out their penthouse windows at Atlanta skyline, dotted with his hotels and the hospital where their crisis had begun. 2 years ago, he'd faced a choice between love and profit. Tonight, he was facing a choice between truth and survival. What do we do? Alicia closed her laptop and took his hands. We do what we've always done. We tell the truth, we fight for what's right, and we trust that people are smart enough to see through lies. And if they're not, Then we start over. Together, as many times as it takes. But as they prepared for the battle ahead, neither of them realized that their unknown enemy was closer than they imagined. Someone they trusted had been recording their conversations, documenting their strategies, and preparing to destroy them from the inside. The betrayal would come from the last place they expected, and it would test their love in ways that cancer never could. The betrayal was revealed through a single email that arrived at 6:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Preston was reviewing legal documents in preparation for the federal investigation when his computer chimed with a message from an anonymous account. The subject line read, "You trusted the wrong person." Inside was a single attachment, a recording of Janet Walsh, the Channel 7 reporter, talking to someone on the phone about the Foundation expose. "The footage you provided was perfect," Walsh's voice said. "The hidden restaurant recording especially. How long have you been documenting their conversations?" "6 months," replied a voice that made Preston's blood freeze. "Ever since I realized how much money was flowing through that foundation. Rich people always get richer off charity. I just needed to prove it." The voice belonged to Dr. Martinez, the same doctor who'd first suggested Preston divorce Alicia to protect his assets. The same man who'd been treating Alicia throughout her recovery. Preston called Marcus immediately. "We need to meet. Now, and bring Victoria Chun." 2 hours later, they sat in Victoria's law office listening to the full recording. Dr. Martinez had been secretly documenting Preston and Alicia's medical visits, recording private conversations during treatment sessions, and providing edited clips to make their legitimate discussions sound corrupt. He's been playing both sides from the beginning, Victoria realized. First trying to convince Preston to abandon Alicia, then documenting everything when Preston chose differently. But why? Alicia asked. She'd arrived directly from her latest checkup, still wearing the hospital bracelet from her appointment with the same doctor who'd been betraying them. Marcus pulled up Dr. Martinez's financial records. Because he's been taking money from pharmaceutical companies to steer wealthy patients towards specific treatments. The Foundation's success threatened his entire operation. The pattern became clear as they studied the evidence. Dr. Martinez had been running an elaborate scheme for years, convincing wealthy patients to choose expensive treatments while taking kickbacks from drug companies and medical device manufacturers. The Foundation's transparent, patient-focused approach threatened to expose how healthcare was really being manipulated for profit. "He tried to stop you from the beginning," Victoria explained. "When that failed, he decided to destroy you instead." But Preston was focused on a different horror. "Alicia, he's been your doctor throughout treatment. What if Dash? What if he sabotaged my care to gather evidence?" Alicia finished. "I wondered why some of my medications seemed to have side effects that didn't match what other patients experienced." The room went silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Martinez hadn't just been documenting their conversations. He'd been manipulating Alicia's treatment to create situations he could exploit. "We need independent medical review of every treatment decision he made," Victoria said. "If he compromised patient care for personal gain, that's attempted murder, not just fraud." Preston felt rage building like he'd never experienced. This man had endangered his wife's life while pretending to save it. But Alicia's voice cut through his anger. "Preston, we can't let this consume us. We have bigger problems right now." She was right. The Foundation expose was still playing on every news channel. Federal investigators were reviewing financial records. Medical partners were canceling contracts. Everything they'd built was crumbling while they dealt with personal betrayal. "What do you suggest? We go public with everything. The truth about Dr. Martinez, the truth about our finances, the truth about what we've actually accomplished." Marcus shook his head. "That's risky. Admitting we were fooled by Martinez makes us look naive. Defensive press conferences rarely work." "Then we don't hold a press conference," Alicia said. "We do something better." She pulled out her phone and showed them the Foundation's website. Over 3,000 families had submitted treatment applications in the past month alone. "We invite the media to meet our patients, not in a conference room or hotel ballroom, but in their homes, their hospitals, their real lives. Let them see who we've actually helped." Victoria looked skeptical. Patient privacy laws, dash. Don't apply if patients volunteer to share their stories, Alicia finished. And I think they will, because they know the difference between charity and exploitation. Over the next 48 hours, they coordinated the most unusual media response in corporate history. Instead of press releases or legal statements, they arranged for journalists to meet foundation recipients directly. A single mother in Detroit whose daughter's leukemia treatment was funded by the foundation. A veteran in Dallas whose experimental surgery gave him back the use of his legs. An elderly couple in Birmingham who could afford cancer treatment because of foundation partnerships. Family after family told the same story. Real people getting real help from an organization that treated them with dignity instead of pity. The turning point came when 8-year-old Maria Santos, whose brain tumor surgery had been funded by the foundation, called Channel 7 directly. "That lady on TV is lying," Maria told Janet Walsh during a live phone interview. "Mr. Preston and Mrs. Alicia saved my life. They didn't take money, they gave money. Lots of money. For kids like me who were going to die." The interview went viral within hours. Hashtag #MariaTruth began trending on social media as patients and families shared their own foundation stories. Dr. Martinez was arrested 2 days later on charges of Medicare fraud, patient exploitation, and attempted extortion. The evidence Victoria had gathered, combined with the anonymous recordings, painted a picture of systematic corruption that made national headlines. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source. Richard Hartwell, serving his federal sentence, issued a public statement from prison. "I spent 2 years trying to destroy Preston Hale because I thought he was weak. I was wrong. A man who chooses love over profit, who builds hope instead of walls, who turns personal tragedy into public good. That's not weakness. That's strength I never understood." As the foundation's reputation was restored and partnerships renewed, Preston realized they'd survived their greatest test not through lawyers or public relations, but through the simple power of truth lived consistently over time. But their story wasn't over yet. The hardest challenge still lay ahead. 1 year later, Preston stood in the same courtroom where this story began, but this time he wasn't the defendant. He was a witness in the federal case against Dr. Martinez, testifying about how medical corruption had nearly destroyed both his wife's health and their life's work. "Mr. Hale," the prosecutor asked, "when Dr. Martinez suggested you divorce your wife to protect your assets, what was your reaction?" "Horror," Preston replied. "The idea that someone would abandon their spouse during a life-threatening illness for financial reasons was incomprehensible to me. Yet you considered it." Preston looked at Alicia, sitting in the gallery wearing the same blue dress she'd worn to their wedding. 3 years of battles had changed them both, but her eyes still held the same strength that had first captured his attention. "For about 12 hours, I've considered it," Preston admitted. "Not because I wanted to, but because everyone around me said it was the smart business decision. What I learned is that sometimes the smart decision and the right decision are different things." "And which did you choose?" "I chose love. I chose loyalty. I chose the belief that some things are more valuable than money." Preston's voice carried across the silent courtroom. "I chose my wife." The trial had been going on for 3 weeks, revealing the full scope of Dr. Martinez's corruption. Kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, manipulation of treatment protocols for profit, deliberate exploitation of desperate families. His crimes went back over a decade. But today was different. Today, the prosecution was making their final argument about how corruption in healthcare affects real people, real families, real lives. After Preston's testimony, Alicia took the stand. "Mrs. Hale, you were Dr. Martinez's patient for 8 months. During that time, did you notice anything unusual about your treatment?" "Several things," Alicia replied. "Medications that cause side effects inconsistent with published research. Treatment delays that seemed arbitrary. Most concerning, he kept pushing experimental drugs that weren't covered by our foundation's protocols." "Why didn't you change doctors?" Alicia was quiet for a moment. "Because when you're fighting for your life, you trust the person who says they're trying to save you. Even when something feels wrong, you convince yourself that you're being paranoid, that your fear is making you imagine problems that don't exist. When did you realize your instincts were correct? When we discovered he'd been recording our private conversations during treatment sessions. No legitimate doctor violates patient privacy that way. He wasn't documenting my care. He was gathering ammunition to attack my husband. The defense attorney, trying to minimize Martinez's actions, made a crucial mistake during cross-examination. Mrs. Hale, isn't it true that your husband's foundation has made millions of dollars through medical partnerships? Yes, it has, Alicia replied calmly. The attorney smiled, thinking he'd scored a point. So you've profited from your illness? We've invested every dollar the foundation earned back into patient care. Our personal net worth has decreased by approximately $40 million since starting the foundation. Alicia pulled out a financial statement. Would you like to review our tax returns? The courtroom buzzed as the defense attorney realized his mistake. By trying to prove the Hales were profiting from charity, he'd instead highlighted their sacrifice. Furthermore, Alicia continued, the foundation has now funded treatment for over 1,500 families. The medical protocols we helped develop are being used in hospitals across 12 countries. If that's profiting from illness, I wish more people would profit the same way. After the trial recessed, Preston and Alicia walked through downtown Atlanta toward their car. The city looked different to them now, not just as the seat of their business empire, but as home to one of 37 medical facilities the foundation now supported. Are you okay? Preston asked, noticing Alicia's fatigue. Just tired. Testifying is exhausting. She paused at the courthouse steps. Preston, there's something I need to tell you. His heart stopped. After everything they'd survived, those words still triggered panic. The doctors found something during my last scan. Preston felt the world tilt. What kind of something? Alicia smiled. The same mischievous smile she'd worn the day she challenged his assumptions about power and responsibility. Nothing bad. Something good. Something wonderful, actually. She pulled out an ultrasound image from her purse. I'm pregnant. Preston stared at the grainy black and white image showing the tiny form of their child-to-be. After everything they'd been through, cancer, corporate warfare, betrayal, public scandal, life was giving them a gift neither had dared to hope for. How is that possible? The doctor said chemotherapy might affect Dash. Might affect, not would affect. Sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them. Alicia touched her still flat stomach. Due date is March 15th. Preston pulled her into his arms right there on the courthouse steps, not caring about the reporters and photographers documenting every moment of the trial. Are you ready to be a father? She whispered. Are you ready to raise a child who's going to grow up thinking that fighting for what's right is normal? Alicia laughed. I can't wait to meet a kid who thinks building foundations and taking on corrupt doctors is just what parents do. As they walked toward their car, Preston realized their story had come full circle. They'd started with a choice between love and empire, survived by choosing both, and now they were creating something neither alone could have achieved, a family built on the foundation of doing what's right, even when it's difficult. But their greatest challenge still lay ahead. Raising a child in a world where compassion was often seen as weakness, where profit was valued over people, where the easy choice and the right choice were rarely the same thing. The next generation of their story was about to begin. 5 years later, Preston stood in the nursery of their Birmingham home, watching 4-year-old Sarah Alicia Hale stack blocks into what she announced was a hospital for sick teddy bears. Daddy, why do some teddy bears get better medicine than others? Sarah asked, her dark eyes serious in the way that reminded Preston of her mother. What do you mean, sweetheart? At preschool, Tommy said rich teddy bears go to nice hospitals and poor teddy bears don't get medicine at all. Is that true? Preston sat down beside his daughter, marveling at how a 4-year-old could ask the question that had shaped his entire adult life. It used to be more true than it should have been, he said carefully. That's why Mommy and Daddy started the foundation, to make sure all teddy bears, rich and poor, could get the medicine they need. Sarah considered this with the gravity of someone much older. Did you fix it? Before Preston could answer, Alicia appeared in the doorway. Even after 5 years, she still took his breath away. Now healthy, confident, and 8 months pregnant with their second child. "We're trying to fix it," Alicia said, settling carefully into the rocking chair they'd bought when Sarah was born. "But it's a big problem, so it takes lots of people working together. Like building a really big block tower?" "Exactly like that." Preston looked around the nursery, walls painted soft green because they decided to be surprised by the new baby's gender, shelves filled with books about kindness and courage, a window overlooking the Birmingham neighborhood where Alicia had grown up and where their foundation had built its flagship facility. The past 5 years had transformed not just their family, but their understanding of what success actually meant. The Alicia Davis Foundation now operated in 48 cities across 15 countries. The medical protocols developed through Alicia's treatment had helped save over 8,000 lives. Hale Industries had become the first hospitality company to integrate comprehensive healthcare access into its business model. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real story was in moments like this, a 4-year-old asking why some people get better healthcare than others, then growing up in a family that made answering that question their life's work. "Daddy," Sarah said, abandoning her blocks to climb into his lap. "When I grow up, can I work at the foundation too?" "You can do anything you want when you grow up," Preston replied. "But remember, the foundation isn't a job. It's a way of thinking about how we treat other people." "What do you mean?" Alicia spoke up from her rocking chair. "It means when you see someone who needs help, you don't ask if they deserve it or if helping them will benefit you. You ask how you can help them best. Even if they can't pay you back. Especially if they can't pay you back." Sarah nodded solemnly, as if filing this information away for future reference. Preston's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, now the Foundation's chief operating officer. "Board meeting in an hour. The UN partnership proposal needs final approval." The United Nations had approached them about expanding the Foundation's model internationally. It would be their biggest undertaking yet, establishing medical access foundations in developing countries, funded through partnerships with multinational corporations. "I have to go to a meeting," Preston told Sarah. "Want to come with me? Can I bring my teddy bear hospital?" "Of course." An hour later, Sarah sat in the corner of the Hale Industries boardroom, quietly arranging her stuffed animals while the adults discussed global healthcare policy. She'd attended dozens of these meetings over the years, absorbing lessons about leadership, compassion, and the intersection of business and social responsibility. The board was reviewing impact reports from their latest initiatives. Over 2 million people had received medical treatment through foundation-funded programs. Pharmaceutical companies were now required to reserve portions of new drug supplies for foundation distribution. 3 major medical schools had established full scholarships for students committed to working in underserved communities. The UN partnership would extend our reach to over 30 developing countries, Victoria Chen explained. She joined the Foundation's board after Martinez's conviction, bringing her expertise in international law. "The financial commitment is substantial," board member Janet Mills noted. "We're talking about $1 billion initiative over 5 years. The question," Preston said, "isn't whether we can afford to do this. The question is whether we can afford not to do this." He looked around the table at faces that had become family over years of shared purpose. Marcus, Victoria, Janet, David Chun, and 6 other business leaders who discovered that success felt different when it was shared. 5 years ago, we started this foundation to save one life, Alicia's. Today, we're talking about potentially saving millions of lives. But the principle is exactly the same. He gestured towards Sarah, who was explaining to her teddy bear why all the animals needed equal access to imaginary medicine. "We do this because it's right. Because every person deserves the chance to fight for their life with dignity. Because the world we leave our children should be better than the world we inherited." The board voted unanimously to approve the UN partnership. As the meeting ended and board members filed out, Sarah approached Preston with her favorite teddy bear. "Daddy, I figured out the answer to my question." "Which question?" "Why some teddy bears get better medicine than others." "It's because the grown-ups haven't learned yet that all teddy bears are the same inside, even if they look different on the outside." Preston knelt down to his daughter's eye level, amazed once again by the clarity that came from seeing the world through innocent eyes. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. And it's going to be your generation's job to make sure all the grown-ups learn that lesson. Sarah nodded seriously. Don't worry, Daddy. I'll teach them. As they walked out of the boardroom together, Preston realized that the empire he'd once feared losing had become something far more valuable. A legacy of love, a foundation for hope, and a family committed to the radical idea that everyone deserves dignity. The story that began with an impossible choice between love and profit had become something neither he nor Alicia could have imagined. A life where love and purpose were the same thing, where success was measured in lives saved rather than dollars earned, where the question wasn't what you could afford to lose, but what you couldn't afford not to give. And in a nursery in Birmingham, Alabama, a 4-year-old girl played with teddy bears and dreamed of a world where everyone got the medicine they needed, simply because they were alive and therefore worthy of care. The foundation would continue long after Preston and Alicia were gone, but the values that built it, love over fear, hope over cynicism, courage over comfort, those would live forever in the children who grew up believing that fixing the world wasn't just possible, but expected. Sometimes the greatest empires aren't built with steel and stone, but with compassion and commitment to the simple truth that every life matters equally. That was Preston and Alicia's true legacy, and it was just the beginning. So what would you do if your biggest crisis became your greatest opportunity? What would you choose if you had to pick between protecting what you've built and fighting for what's right? Preston Hale thought he understood success. Hotels, profits, board meetings, stock prices, the typical markers of achievement in corporate America. But when his wife Alicia got sick, he discovered something that changed everything. Real success isn't what you accumulate. It's what you're willing to sacrifice for others. Here's what makes this story different from every other business tale you've heard. Preston didn't just choose love over profit. He discovered that love and profit aren't opposites. When you build your company on values instead of just value, when you measure success and lives changed instead of just dollars earned, something magical happens. You don't just make money, you make meaning. The Alicia Davis Foundation started as one man's desperate attempt to save his wife's life. 5 years later, it's a global network that's helped save thousands of lives. The medical protocols developed for Alicia are now standard treatment in hospitals worldwide. The hotel company that almost collapsed under the weight of doing what's right became the most profitable hospitality chain in its sector. But here's the real lesson that'll blow your mind. Preston's story isn't unique. It's happening right now all around you. CEOs choosing people over profit. Families turning personal tragedy into public good. Ordinary people making extraordinary differences by refusing to accept that things have to stay the way they are. The only difference between Preston's story and your story is that he made the choice. When everyone told him to cut his losses, he doubled down on love. When the world said, choose between family and fortune, he chose to redefine what fortune actually means. What's your impossible choice? What's the situation in your life where everyone's telling you to be practical, to protect yourself, to choose the safe path over the right path? Maybe you're not facing cancer or corporate takeovers. Maybe your challenge is smaller, helping a struggling neighbor, standing up to workplace injustice, choosing integrity over advancement. But the principle is exactly the same. Love over fear, hope over cynicism, courage over comfort. If this story moved you, if it made you think about what really matters when everything else falls away, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct. It's often the smartest business decision you'll ever make. Subscribe for more stories that prove the world doesn't have to be the way it is. Stories about people who looked at impossible situations and said, "Watch me make this possible." Tell me in the comments. What would you do if someone saw your worth before you believed in it yourself? Would you run from that kind of love, or would you build something that lasts? And remember, the most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It gives you the courage to become the person your life needs you to be. Your story is waiting. The only question is, are you brave enough to write it?